So every year around this time we talk about predictions. Thought we'd have a little discussion about the predictions you guys, I know John, you were on last year's prediction show. I think Matt, you were on as well. Talk about your predictions and what came true and what was maybe we were a little bit off the mark. So the first prediction was from our VP, Brian Rexroad, who predicted that we would see a struggle going into the cloud. So struggle transitioning things, more load into the public cloud. What do you guys think? It seems to me that it's been fairly accurate. We've seen a lot of open S3 buckets that have been compromised. Actually, I feel like we're seeing a flood of new vendor products specifically trying to secure the public cloud, as we kind of acknowledge that the public cloud is not as secure as probably we'd like it to be. So what do you think, Matt?
Sure, I think that the paradigm of working in the cloud is significantly different from working on any other IT operation. It's much more powerful and it's very interesting to be able to work in that way, but it means that people have to sort of spin up their skills and understand how that works and understand the way that they're configuring things.
Right.
S3 buckets have been a problem for a while. I'm pretty sure Amazon is working on setting the defaults for S3 and coming up with all sorts of other ways to monitor what you've got in your configuration to tell you, by the way, you've done something you probably didn't want to do.
Right.
And that's a good move. And again, not everyone's using S3 and not everyone's using Amazon.
Right.
And there's definitely, we keep seeing problems where people have misconfigured their cloud storage, or perhaps they've left some sort of credentials in like a GitHub repository, and those credentials control their cloud, which means people can spit up new instances and install crypto mining malware and things like that. So I think the short version of that is, yes, I think Brian was absolutely correct.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's another one of these cases where it feels like you're losing a little bit of control, right? You put your stuff out in one of these public clouds, and I think some folks think, okay, it's not my responsibility anymore, but it is. You need to, all the precautions we talk about in data centers and on laptops and on mobile, you still need to protect your stuff. You need to make sure you're thinking through all the cases of leaving stuff in the clear and really what's going into sort of putting a nice secure, comfortable blanket on your stuff.
I was going to say the human factors there are still kind of a challenge that people forget about when they go to the cloud, is that, the things like you were talking about, admin passwords being left alone, GitHub repositories. I mean, we don't have a lot of good logging still, which we were hoping for, and so tracking that type of thing is still not, resolved. We're trying to get more and more stuff into the cloud.
Right.
I think one of the things that's important about this is that the folks who have been doing the IT function are the ones who are moving things into the cloud. And if you're doing standard IT in a corporate environment, you've got an IT team, you've got a security team.
Right.
IT sort of makes the assumption that security is being done somewhere separately from what they're doing, and then whatever they may make small mistakes, that'll be covered by the guys who are doing security. Whereas in cloud, it seems like everything is much more integrated. And if you have a team that can do the security for your cloud, great.
Right.
But I think a lot of folks are moving to the cloud and telling the IT team to handle the function. And that same mindset is going in. So you're going to have people who aren't making the right decisions security-wise because they assume that the cloud provider is doing those things for them. Right. And that's one of those things.
That's the biggest thing. They assume that the cloud provider is doing it.
Right. And when you move to the cloud, you have to understand where the line is drawn. What is your responsibility as a customer of a cloud provider, and what are the responsibilities of the person managing the platform? Right. And if you don't have that line correctly, you're going to have gaps.
Right, cool. So I think typically we give these predictions a letter grade. You think this one is an A or a B+?
I think it's a solid A.
Solid A. I'm good with that. All right, the next prediction I think came from Matt, and you predicted that we would see a increase in complexity of IoT malware and vulnerabilities and exploits. Right. How do you think
well,
you did?
There's different ways to measure this, and I'm starting like that because I know you guys are going to give me a better grade on this. I did take a look at the scanning results for Telnet, which for the longest time was my barometer of, are people still scanning for really poorly configured IoT devices that have Telnet open with a default password? That's like bottom of the barrel. If you can do that, you can build your own botnet kind of stuff. And the scanning has gone down. And the number of flows has definitely gone down. The number of sources has not significantly changed, but at least the the weight that scanning has been given among these large botnets has gone down. So I think people who are running the larger IoT botnets have sort of shifted their focus to other populations of targets because they're not getting as much value out of breaking into Telnet anymore. Whether you want to use them as because that's maybe a handful of people controlling a large number of bots, but it doesn't mean that the activity at large has shifted focus.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I would say if you predicted that IoT, scanning and vulnerabilities was going to decrease, I think you would have been wrong. Mm-hmm. But certainly this is still probably our number one threat vector, right? I mean, this, we see it on the internet weather every show that it's the top. I think it's probably going to be the top till we stop running the show. Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, then the question of complexity, right? Where do you think in terms of the complexity of these?
Well, I think we're seeing different applications of the bots that are being generated through this IoT exploitation activity. I mean, we were talking before the show. Mirai and Hajime are two big botnets that we're seeing different functions being built into those. We're seeing VPN filter. Yeah. We're seeing these things used for sending spam as proxy hop points. Right. It seems like the stuff that you would usually use your Windows bots for, those functions are being handed over to the IoT bots as well. So we're seeing more diversification, I guess, in what you're doing with your bots. That wasn't quite what my prediction was about. It was more about the actual attacking and the low-hanging fruit attacks slowly going away in favor of more advanced and sophisticated stuff.
Right. I think we talked about this a little bit last time, is that with Mirai being released and open, we're seeing variants of Mirai, variants of the same malware because it's readily accessible. So, maybe you don't need complex, fileless stuff anymore or as much because Mirai's there, you tweak it for what you're specifically trying to do and just use whichever threat vector you want. So yeah.
I think though too you have your metric there was Telnet, and we're seeing a lot of from what I've seen is the using other ports, other services. I mean, we see like even the Android port service, which has been made a pretty high number there in the weather. A lot of these IoTs are running Android variants, and so when you start scanning and attacking that functionality, then it is still an IoT type of mechanism.
That's true.
Okay. Yeah. So let's do a grade for the IoT complexity prediction. I'll say maybe B-, John?
That's generous.
I was going to be a little bit better. I'm going to give him a solid B.
Solid B. I'm happy with that. Matt's an excellent contributor to the show. I think we should err on the side of positivity. He deserves it.
Well, thank you very much.
All right, and then John, you're on the show as well. You want to run through your predictions and give an initial take on how you think your prediction played out?
I think that last year I kind of did my predictions in the series of a quiz, and I'm gonna focus on really just the one at this time, which is the prediction that we would have and really a continuation of a deficit in security professionals, cybersecurity professionals. There's been a recent study, in fact, getting some publication out there that says that we need to look at cybersecurity professionals, not necessarily based on education or experience, but looking for certain traits, because we're at that large enough gap that we can't just say, go to school, get a cybersecurity degree, because we're not going to get the resources that way. So I think that personally, I think that prediction, maybe a little self-serving, but it's coming true.
Yeah, I think an under, amount of security resources, something that we hear. I mean, when I'm, at technical conferences, it's a pretty consistent message. Security analysts, security developers, really the lack of bodies, the turnover is really fast, and definitely, hopefully, with some of these initiatives, getting young people to be interested in coding and young people interested in security, hopefully that will help over time. But I think in our current state, there is definitely a gap in the amount of folks qualified in this field and the amount of people that are needed to secure stuff.
I'm going to go out on a wing. I'm going to say that your prediction from last year is a cop-out. And here's why. Because you gave us 1 year 1 year to try and fix that problem.
Yeah.
And any measurable change in that would have taken longer than a year.
It was a smart prediction. Let's say that at the very least.
You're a betting man, I can tell. Right. All right.
You want to grade John, Matt?
I caught out last year too, so I'll if I remember right. So yeah, it's true.
So a grade? He was absolutely correct.
But do you want to?
Do I want to take off points because I think it was a cheap move?
A safe bet?
No, he's technically correct, but I'm keeping my eye on him for next year.
Right.
If he puts it down again as his prediction.
All right, so no reuse, John. You got to push the envelope.
I'll give myself a C. I mean, it was easy. It was an easy grade, right?
Well, I think we'll meet you in the middle. We'll give you about an A-.
There you go.
Yeah, I like that.
With a little qualification for ease of prediction. Cool. All right. So next, I think we're going to go through some trends, some things that we've noticed in 2018, changes or persistent or significant activity. Matt, did you want to start us off with your noticeable trend for the year?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to do two trends. So the first one is these Magecart attacks, which people have probably heard a lot about. So if you're not familiar with them, Magecart is a name that's been given to a set of attacks. Which may be actually more than one group, but the technique is the same, in which they're actually compromising e-commerce websites and injecting a little bit of JavaScript into them. And once that JavaScript is on that site, it's actually siphoning user data out of the site as people use the site. I've seen this grow over the year. I think this is a pretty interesting attack vector. It has hit some major retail websites on the internet, so I see that there's no reason this trend should slow down. If it works, it works, and I think attackers are going to keep using it. Typically affects Magenta, which is software that it makes it very easy to run a storefront on the internet. But there's no reason that this attack couldn't be modified to affect other e-commerce websites as well. In fact, it could be tailored to any one site. As long as you have the means of modifying their website, you can sneak your code in and it may not be noticed for a very long time.
Cool.
So the second one I'm going to talk about is I want to call it supply chain, but it has more to do with trusting the software that you're using that's sort of open source. For me, one of the big ones was there was this event stream code that I think we talked about on the show a couple weeks ago. It's a Node.js module that is very widely used. And the person who was maintaining this open source code decided they were done maintaining it, they had had enough, and they handed it off to somebody else.
Right.
And this somebody else slowly snuck in a back door into the code. It was, targeted towards a very specific target that they had in mind, but the code was sent to anybody using it. So in theory, this could have been a much more wide-ranging attack.
Right.
So this sort of idea
that speaks to a trend in terms of sort of trust in general.
I don't know if it's really a trend. I think it's more a realization by attackers that this is a viable model. Okay. I mean, another example of it would be these browser plugins. People will maintain a browser plugin for a while, and then someone comes and says, for a certain amount of money, I'll take it off your hands and I'll run it from here on out. And there's not a whole lot of money in browser plugins, so I can see why people would be tempted to take the money and leave it. But the person who maintains it then has the power to update that plugin. And anytime someone needs, this browser plugin, their browser will pull down the latest version if that's part of the functionality. And whatever gets added to that, and it has happened, it could be adware, it could be spyware, it could be all number of things, which then runs in the context of your browser, which then offers it more access to stuff that and it's the same way you could do, the same way like a banking Trojan would have access if it runs from that perspective. The plugins have that same kind of access.
John, do you see a parallel there with malicious apps in mobile app stores where sometimes they're planted on purpose?
Oh yeah, no question. And we've seen a number of these, and just the fact that there's a difference sometimes about intentional maliciousness, where it's intended to overtake the machine and just, I'm going to do this service for you, and in the interim, push this button or click this thing to help me, you need extra permissions or whatever. And so, there's definitely a parallel.
Cool. I want to make an important distinction, though, is that with a malicious app that makes its way into the store, people were going to have to look at that, assess it at first value, and then make the decision to install it or not. Right. In the cases where we're talking about these modules and these browser plugins, someone's already made that decision, and it could have been a month, it could have been years ago, It's just that the math has changed in the background, and they have no idea that somebody else is operating this and maintaining this code at this point.
Yeah, I guess it would be more like if an update to one of those apps had a
Exactly. Like if somebody managed to buy out the owner of an Android app,
right,
and then snuck their own code into the next update of that, I think that's the same model.
Okay, cool.
So anyway, I think it sort of suggests that vigilance doesn't end, once you've made your initial decision to install some piece of software. And the folks who are developing it really should be keeping tabs on what's happening to their code.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if it's something that gets better or worse over time, this sort of unintended consequence of open source. Cool, thanks, Matt. John, do you want to do your trends or trend that you noticed next for 2018?
Yeah, I think I'll probably just talk one thing that I actually meets a couple of the predictions from last year, so I should have used those for the grade, I guess. But yeah, the Spectre and Meltdown saga over 2018 continues even today. I noticed that there's a Spectre with Split Spectre, I think is what they're calling it, as a new attack. And, these are the variations on a mechanism to get into the CPU, into CPU calls. We're continuing to see the researchers look at these things, try and figure out all these in-depth and tags, even some into what you're talking about, Matt, is into that low-level basic core, processing, try and find the weaknesses of vulnerabilities, some of which have gone on for a number of years. And I think that we're going to continue to see those low-level attacks and vectors like Spectre and Meltdown continue, for some time now.
Yeah, Spectre and Meltdown certainly were prominent, campaigns, activities that we saw this year. I think,
Well, we never actually saw anyone using these bugs in the wild, right?
That's the key. Yeah, that's exactly the right thing is that they're getting a lot of publicity, but really, what's the risk?
Mm-hmm. Was there another one or two you wanted to bring up? It sounded like you had a list.
Well, I think the only other thing I was going to bring up is that, it kind of ties into that we have, we predicted that there'd be some more protocol vulnerabilities in 2018. Again, it's probably the cheap prediction. I mean, but Spectre and Meltdown fit that in some ways. We continue to see attacks against Bluetooth, looking at that deep dive protocol issues. And for 2018 was probably pretty significant, even in the mobile space, not just the desktop, laptop server, and that, people are starting to really dive into those protocols, more so than they ever have. We've seen that with TLS, SSL, SSH. I think we're going to continue to see that even into the next time. I know we're not doing predictions here, but it is certainly a story that hit 2018 pretty hard.
All right. Well, something I've been thinking about is, I think 2017, last year was really a emphasis on ransomware. We had the NotPetya and those types of activities, and I don't think we've seen quite as much of that this year. We've seen some targeted ransomware, but I think really the focus from a high level has been more, this crypto mining or even targeted. Going after crypto wallets, right? Which I think the term is cryptojacking, and that's a new trend. I think we're probably, crypto mining is probably where we are now, where IoT threats were, 3-5 years ago. That I think crypto mining is probably only going to get worse moving forward. But it seems like that's been a real trend. That ransomware, where you're going after, some handful of bitcoins. Yeah, that's seem to be working, but if I can, put all my botnet resources out doing crypto mining, although I guess crypto mining is getting more difficult now, right?
Well, it depends on which cryptocurrency you plan to mine.
Yeah. But that seems like a fairly significant trend, and it feels like we're seeing more phishing, targeted phishing, just a little bit of a shift. I know we don't see rampant shifts in the threat vectors as we see in the internet weather. It's basically the same, 10, 12 ports that we see being scanned consistently. I think that's another trend that we're seeing, that the volume of scanning for these same ports, the same vulnerabilities, it's probably created more stability in that the search for exploit places to put your exploit. So
you give me a couple of things to think about there. I think really the reason that we see so few tectonic shifts in the scanning that we're seeing is because the big players are such huge botnets at this point that any one of them would have to make the move for the overall stats to change. So I can see that being. We still see some new vulnerabilities, or at least ones that someone has discovered, and they'll suddenly spike up, but they're not going to jump into the top 10 as a result of it.
Right.
I was thinking about the prediction that Brian had made in terms of moving to cloud.
Yeah.
And I think there's a similar shift moving to the containerization technologies, Docker, Kubernetes, all this sort of stuff. And I think we've seen some interesting stuff in the last year where people are finding ways to install their crypto mining malware into a Docker container and then drop it onto some management platform and then spin up 80 Docker containers because no one's bothered to put a password on it or no one's bothered to harden it properly. I think that's going to be the new wave of those sorts of attacks. If people were starting to figure out cloud, any of this new containerization stuff, I think, is going to be the next move.
Right, it's a trend. The same journey we're making in software development, getting our things into cloud, getting our things into containers. It's the same from the adversaries, that they're doing the same path with their exploits that we're doing with our good software. So.
Yeah.
Are you thinking too that we're gonna we've seen a lot more like typo squatting to enable some of that?
I'm not sure that I've seen any more of that. I think it's always been around. I mean, maybe I've been seeing more articles about typo squatting, homoglyph attacks, things like that. But no, I can't say I've seen any major changes. Have you seen anything?
I know certainly been a story this year, or continuing, that we're seeing those.
Okay.
I also wanted to mention, you were talking about the shift from ransomware to crypto mining, and I did read an article about that. And I can't remember if it was Kaspersky. It was another one of the major antivirus companies who said they sort of thought about why this could possibly be. And I think the main point that they made is that the difficulty of cashing out, the difficulty getting a person who has ransomware on their machine to figure out what Bitcoin is, find a way to buy it, and then find a way to send it to them without any sort of hiccups in the way. It's just not as profitable.
Well, maybe you're also seeing with the shift to the cloud and the sort of the instructions to not pay the ransom, maybe all my data is stored in the cloud. I'm not worried if you got ransomware on my machine, and I'm not going to pay. Maybe that's trend is getting there, that you're getting less of a willingness of a ransomware infected machine to pay the ransom. Whereas if you're going right after the wallet, the cryptocurrency's there, it's ready to go. If you can steal a wallet, you're like you said, you don't have to take those 3 initial steps.
You don't have to support your user base, for lack of a better term.
Right.
Oh wait, victim. That's a better term.
Victim base.
Victim base.
Yeah. So yeah, that's definitely
too much work. It's too much work to support them, right?
Yeah.
It's true.
Cool.
All right. It seems like we've had our hit and miss predictions for the year, which I'll take my lumps on that one. And it seems like we've actually identified some interesting trends that we're seeing. I wouldn't call them predictions quite yet, but at least things that we've noticed this year that are worth mentioning. And we'll see where it goes. Please don't hold us to any of these because they're not predictions, they're just observations. We'll save that for the next show. But yeah, it's been a pleasure being on the show with you guys. And happy holidays and happy New Year.
Thanks, Matt.
Great, thank you.